What you're playing, it hurts the ears of people who truly understand music. Kevin Kowalski said that right outside Orchestra Hall, dressed in a flawless black suit, a neatly tied silk bow at his collar, and wearing the faint disdain of a symphonic artist who believed he stood above the world. In front of him was just a man sitting on the sidewalk, a worn-out denim jacket, a pair of boots with cracked soles, an acoustic guitar with most of its paint peeled off. Kevin called that music noise pollution. He said people like him should stand outside the concert hall and listen to real artists perform. But there was one thing Kevin did not know. The man he had just mocked didn't just know how to play music. He still possessed the soul of music, something Kevin had lost a long time ago. And in just a few days, that very street musician would walk into Orchestra Hall, sit among 1,000 elite audience members, and force them all to fall silent and listen to every single note. If you enjoy stories about people the world overlooks, yet who carry within them a value powerful enough to silence every prejudice, subscribe to the channel right now. Because the real question isn't who the man sitting on the sidewalk is. It's what will happen when the one who mocked him is finally forced to sit still and listen as he plays. Every evening, when the streetlights along Michigan Avenue in Chicago begin to glow, people see a man sitting on an old folding chair, holding an acoustic guitar with most of its paint worn away. His name is Harry Simmons, 43 years old, stubble as if he hasn't shaved in days, a denim jacket frayed at the shoulders, a pair of boots with cracked soles. Beside him is an open guitar case, with a few scattered quarters and dimes dropped in by passers-by, mostly out of pity, not because they actually stopped to listen. Harry has been playing guitar on this street corner for 7 years. 7 years. The same spot, the same old guitar, the same open case, and the same truth, that every day thousands of people pass by, yet almost none of them stop for more than 30 seconds. He is not homeless. Harry rents a small basement room in an old building in the Pilsen neighborhood, south of Chicago. The room is just big enough for a single bed, a small table, and 2 guitars, an acoustic one he brings to the street every day, and a nylon string classical guitar he keeps at home like a treasure. The rent is $350 a month. Harry earns enough from street tips, along with teaching guitar for free to a few neighborhood kids. Sometimes their parents give him a little money. Sometimes just a meal. From the outside, his life looks exactly like that of someone who has accepted defeat. But if anyone truly stops, truly stands still and listens to Harry play, they will notice something very strange. His rough, calloused fingers move across the fretboard with a terrifying precision. Not the kind of mechanical, cold precision, but the kind of precision of flowing water, natural, fluid, effortless, as if the music is finding its own way out through each string. Harry can play anything. Bach, Villa-Lobos, Barrios. The most complex classical concertos in the world he plays on that worn guitar with the same calm as if he were making a morning cup of coffee. But the street has no ears for such things. To the pedestrians on Michigan Avenue, Harry is just one of dozens of street performers in Chicago. A figure hunched on the sidewalk, producing background noise that people forget the moment they walk past. Last Friday night, Harry sat in his usual spot, playing Recuerdos de la Alhambra by Tárrega, a classical tremolo piece that demands the highest level of finger technique. He played slowly, gently, each note falling onto the pavement like raindrops. At that moment, a group of 4 people stopped a few steps away from him. 3 men and 1 woman. They were dressed elegantly, black suits, evening gowns, the kind of attire people wear when attending a performance at Orchestra Hall, Chicago's famous symphony venue, located right on this very street, less than 200 meters from where Harry sat. The man leading the group was named Kevin Kowalski, 48 years old, prematurely graying hair, slicked back. The angular face of someone long accustomed to stage lights. Kevin is the principal cellist of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, one of the most prestigious orchestras in the United States. But that prestige, lately, feels more like a burden than a source of pride. For the past 3 years, Kevin has not had a single new solo performance. The most recent review of him in the Chicago Tribune used exactly 6 words. Technically perfect, but lacking soul. Those 6 words haunt him to the point that he has nearly memorized them. And he knows the review is true. He knows because every night when he plays the cello, he can feel a hollow space somewhere in his chest, where music once lived, now replaced by habit. Kevin Kowalski has reached the stage that many artists eventually arrive at, but few are brave enough to admit. He plays music like an office worker goes to work, on time, on pitch, and completely empty. Walking beside Kevin is Felicity Stanton, an oboist, along with 2 other musicians, Duncan Mercer, a violist, and Keith Ashford, a French horn player. They had just left rehearsal and were on their way to dinner. Kevin is the first to notice Harry. He pauses, tilts his head, listens for about 5 seconds, then turns to his group, smirking. "Do you hear that?" Kevin says, loud enough for Harry to hear clearly. "Another sidewalk genius. Michigan Avenue is really becoming sound pollution." Perhaps that harshness is not entirely aimed at Harry. Perhaps it is aimed at Kevin himself. At the part inside him that quietly envies anyone who still plays music because they want to, not because they have to. But Kevin does not realize that. He only sees a man sitting on the sidewalk with a peeling guitar, and he needs someone to look down on. Because it is always easier to look down at others than to look directly at yourself. Felicity covers her mouth, laughing. Duncan pulls out his phone to record. Keith just shakes his head. Harry looks up. He looks at the group in their suits, at the mocking smile on Kevin Kowalski's face, and immediately understands everything. He has seen that kind of smile hundreds of times over the past 7 years. "Hey, my friend." Kevin steps forward, his voice filled with condescension. "I appreciate your spirit. But honestly, what you're playing, it hurts the ears of people who truly understand music. You know Orchestra Hall is right there, don't you? We perform there. If you really love music, then respect it by listening to others play, instead of this." Kevin lightly gestures toward the peeling guitar, as if it were something shameful. Harry does not respond. He simply looks at Kevin, his gaze strangely calm, then lowers his head and continues playing. Kevin scoffs and turns away. "There," he says to his group as they walk off, "that's the problem with the street. Everyone thinks they're an artist." Their laughter fades into the sound of traffic. Harry finishes Recuerdos de la Alhambra. Not a single wrong note. A tremolo so perfect that if any professor at any conservatory in the world had happened to hear it, they would have stopped and asked, "Where did you study?" But no one asks. No one stops. Harry closes the guitar case, counts the tips, $14.75, then quietly walks toward the train station. 2 days later. Sunday. Harry was still sitting in the same place, playing Bach's Chaconne, the solo violin piece Bach wrote in 1720, later transcribed for guitar by Andrés Segovia. This is one of the most difficult works in the entire classical guitar repertoire. 15 uninterrupted minutes, demanding technique, stamina, and, most importantly, an emotional depth that not every artist can reach. Harry played the Chaconne as if he were telling the story of his entire life through sound. At that moment, a woman happened to walk by, Her name was Camelia Ellison, 62 years old, silver hair pinned up high, a refined face with bright gray eyes, the eyes of someone who has seen too much in life to be easily impressed by anything anymore. She wore a gray cashmere coat, a silk scarf, and walked with a gentle but decisive stride, the gait of someone used to making decisions. Camelia Ellison was not an ordinary person. She was the honorary music director of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, a legend. She had once been the youngest solo violinist ever to perform with the New York Symphony Orchestra at the age of 19. She had conducted orchestras at Carnegie Hall. She had been invited to teach at Juilliard, Curtis, and the Royal Academy of Music in London. In the world of classical music in the United States, the name Camelia Ellison carried the weight of a medal. She had retired 3 years earlier, but still served as an advisor on many major musical projects. At the moment, so she was developing an experimental concert night, a special performance at Orchestra Hall where she wanted to combine classical instruments with unexpected elements. A musical experiment she had been thinking about for years, but had still not found the final missing piece. When Camelia passed by where Harry was sitting, she had absolutely no intention of stopping. She was on her way to meet an old friend for coffee. But then she heard it. The chaconne. Camelia slowed to a stop. She did not stop out of curiosity. She stopped out of instinct. The instinct of someone who had lived her entire life in music and could recognize true quality from just the first few notes. She stood there, about 5 meters away from Harry, listening. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Harry did not notice her at all. His eyes were closed. He immersed in the chaconne, his fingers gliding across the fretboard with the speed and precision that Camelia, who had heard thousands of artists perform throughout her career, immediately recognized as extraordinary. Not good, not impressive, but extraordinary. His technique was perfect, but that was not what made Camelia stop. What kept her from walking away was the voice inside the music. Harry was not merely playing the notes. He was conversing with them, whispering, shouting, pleading, forgiving, all at once, within the same piece. Camelia Ellison had heard the chaconne hundreds of times in her life. She had heard the greatest guitarists in the world play this piece. But there was something in Harry's playing, a brutal honesty, that she had never heard before. Harry finished the piece. 15 minutes. He opened his eyes, and saw a silver-haired woman standing in front of him, her eyes red with tears. "Where did you study?" Camelia asked, her voice slightly hoarse. Harry looked at her. "You mean school? I never studied anywhere. Self-taught." Camelia was silent for a long time. Then she gave a small nod and said, "Thank you," before turning and walking away. Harry watched her go, slightly surprised. Usually, the people who stopped would drop a few coins and leave. This woman had stood and listened for 15 minutes, cried, asked exactly one question, and then disappeared. Strange. But Harry had lived on the streets long enough to understand that strangers do strange things, and not every strange thing is worth remembering for very long. He forgot about her that very night, but Camelia did not forget him. That Wednesday, she came back. Same time, same place. This time, she sat on a stone bench about 10 meters away from Harry, silently listening to him play for 40 minutes. That evening, Harry played all sorts of things. Villa Lobos, a prelude by Barrios. Then a strange melody, not one Camelia recognized, that sounded as though he himself had written it. The melody was simple, slow, but had a depth that was hard to name. as if one were leaning over and looking into a well with no visible bottom. Camelia sat and listened, and she began to understand. This was not just a skilled player. This was a different kind of player altogether. His technique was at conservatory level, perhaps far beyond it. But what made him special did not lie in his technique. It lay in the fact that every note he played seemed to have been paid for with something. No note was free. No passage was played just to get through it. Every sound carried weight. At last, she stood up and left, the following Sunday. The third time. This time, Camelia brought 2 cups of coffee. She walked straight over to Harry, set one down beside the guitar case. Harry looked up and recognized her immediately. The silver-haired woman. The one who had stood listening to him for 15 minutes and cried. "You came back," he said. For the third time. Camelia nodded, then sat down on the sidewalk beside him, despite her expensive cashmere coat. "I needed to hear you 2 more times to be sure. Now, I'm sure." "Sure about what?" "That you are exactly the person I've been looking for." Camelia took a sip of coffee. "My name is Camelia Ellison. I used to be the music director of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra." Harry showed no reaction to that name. He did not know who she was. In his world, the world of sidewalks, loose change in tip boxes, and quiet nights alone in a tiny basement room, the name Camelia Ellison meant nothing at all. Camelia realized that, and she smiled. A rare smile. "Harry, I'm organizing a small workshop, an experimental rehearsal session at Orchestra Hall's rehearsal room. Just me, the conductor, and a few musicians. Not a performance, no audience. I want you to come there and play one piece for me so I can hear you in an acoustic space better than the sidewalk." Harry looked at her. "Why?" "Because I have a project, and I think you could be part of it. But I need to be sure, and you also need to know what you want." Harry was silent for a long time. Then he asked, in a low voice, "I don't have a suit." Camelia let out a soft laugh. "Harry, it's a rehearsal room, not the Grammy Awards. I'd just wear exactly what you're wearing now." She took a business card out of her pocket and placed it in the guitar case, right beside the quarters. "Next Wednesday, 2 in the afternoon. Show this card to the person at the door." Wednesday, 1:50 p.m. Harry stood at the back entrance of Orchestra Hall, the business card in his hand, his heart beating faster than usual. He wore the cleanest white shirt he had, still slightly wrinkled because he didn't own an iron. Dark jeans, his old boots, but carefully cleaned. Slung over his shoulder was a faded fabric guitar case. Inside it, a nylon string classical guitar. The security guard looked at the card, looked at Harry, then back at the card again. He made a call to confirm. 30 seconds later, Harry was let inside. The rehearsal room at Orchestra Hall was not as large as the main hall, but to Harry, it felt as vast as a stadium. High ceiling, wooden walls, warm yellow lighting. In the center of the room was a circle of chairs where Camelia Ellison sat, along with conductor Graham Fletcher, and 3 other musicians, a violinist, a young cellist, and a clarinetist. There was no full orchestra, just 6 people in one room. Camelia stood up when she saw Harry. "Harry, have a seat. No need for formalities, just play whatever you want." Harry sat down, opened his case, took out the nylon string classical guitar. The strings were old, slightly worn, but the sound was still warm. He glanced around the room. 5 people were watching him. Graham Fletcher's gaze was polite, but reserved, the look of a professional conductor who had seen hundreds of musicians come and go. The 3 younger musicians showed more curiosity than doubt. Harry took a deep breath. Then he began to play. He played the chaconne, and in that room, with acoustics 1,000 times better than the sidewalk, Harry's guitar rang out with its full power, a power that the noise of traffic, wind, and footsteps on the street had always swallowed in half. Here, nothing swallowed it. By the third minute, Graham Fletcher was leaning forward in his chair. The young violinist had lowered her instrument onto her lap, forgetting she was still holding it. The clarinetist's mouth had fallen slightly open, without him even realizing it. Harry played all 15 minutes. The final note lingered in the room, then slowly faded. Silence. Graham Fletcher was the first to speak. He turned to Camellia, unable to hide the astonishment on his face. "Camellia, I know," Camellia replied, her voice calm, as if she had already heard this exact reaction in her mind before it happened. Graham looked back at Harry. "Where did you study?" "On the sidewalk," Harry answered. Graham opened his mouth, then closed it again. After a moment, he turned back to Camellia. "You're putting him on Uncharted?" Camellia nodded. Graham was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Good, I agree." After the workshop, Camellia walked with Harry toward the exit. "Harry, Uncharted is an experimental concert in the main hall. 1,000 audience members, full orchestra. I want you to perform a solo piece first, then the orchestra will come in after." Harry stopped. 1,000 people. 1,000 people. "Are you sure?" Camellia looked at him. "Harry, I came back to hear you 3 times. I invited you into the rehearsal room. I had Graham Fletcher sit and listen to you in person. If after all of that I'm still not sure, then I've probably lost my mind." Harry looked down at the guitar in his hands. Then he gave a small nod. "All right. Next Saturday, 8 in the evening. And Harry," Camellia continued, "I won't introduce who you are. No name, no biography. You just walk out and play." Harry looked up. "Why not?" "Because I want them to hear you, not your story." News of Camellia Ellison's experimental concert spread quickly throughout Chicago's music scene. The performance was titled Uncharted, a concert where Camellia would combine a traditional symphony orchestra with unexpected elements she kept completely secret. Tickets sold out within 48 hours. That night's audience included music critics, professors from top conservatories, major patrons, and even well-known artists who came purely out of curiosity. Kevin Kowalski, the cellist, was one of the principal members of the orchestra that evening. The night before the final rehearsal, Kevin sat alone in his private practice room at Orchestra Hall. The cello rested on his lap, the bow lying across the strings, but he did not play. He simply sat there, staring into the empty space in front of him. 30 years of professional cello playing, 20 years with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, thousands of performances, and lately, in nearly every rehearsal, he found himself asking the same question: why am I still here? It wasn't that he lacked skill. Kevin Kowalski was very good. His technique was still flawless. But flawless and alive were two completely different things. Kevin played the cello like a truck driver running the same route every day, staying in the right lane, at the right speed, arriving safely, but never once looking out the window. He had once loved music, truly loved it. At 20, he could play the Elgar Cello Concerto with tears streaming down his face. Now, he still played that same piece, but with a face as cold as stone. And the music had grown cold with him. See, when he heard that Camellia would invite a mysterious guest artist to take the stage at Uncharted, Kevin appeared excited, or at least tried to. Probably someone from Juilliard or Curtis, Kevin said to Felicity in the rehearsal room. Ellison never invites mediocrity. Felicity nodded. I heard it's a guitarist. Could be someone from Europe. Classical guitar? Duncan chimed in. That's interesting. It's been a while since Orchestra Hall had a guitar solo. Kevin gently rotated the cello in his hands. Whoever it is, they must be at a certain level to share the stage with us. Ellison understands that. He said the word level with confidence, but somewhere inside, a small voice whispered, What about your own level, Kevin? And none of them, not a single one, had any idea that the mysterious guest artist was the very man they had mocked on the sidewalk. Meanwhile, Harry Simmons lived that week like any other. During the day, he played guitar on the street. At night, he returned to his small room, cooked instant noodles. Then sat in that cramped basement and practiced until his eyes grew heavy. But something had changed. Every night before going to sleep, he would take out his nylon string classical guitar and play. Only this time, he was no longer playing just for himself. He played as if he were standing before 1,000 people. He imagined the stage lights, the rows of red velvet seats, the soft murmur of the crowd before the music began. And he felt afraid. Harry Simmons was not someone easily frightened. He had lived on the streets for 7 years without fear. He was used to being looked down on, to the condescending glances, to the feeling of being invisible in a crowded city. But the stage of Orchestra Hall, that was something entirely different. Because Harry had once lived another life, a life that very few people knew about. 20 years earlier, Harry Simmons had been a freshman at the Oberlin Conservatory, one of the most prestigious music schools in the United States. He earned a full scholarship thanks to an audition video that an admissions professor had called astonishing. But Harry studied there for only 6 months. His mother was diagnosed with terminal cancer. His father had long since passed away. Harry was an only child. He left school, returned home, and took care of his mother for 2 years, until she died. After that, he never went back to school. Not because he didn't want to, but because life didn't allow it. Funeral expenses, hospital debt, rent. Harry took every job he could find, washing dishes, moving goods, delivering pizza, and played guitar on the street to make up the rest. And then one day, he realized he was 43 years old and had never truly stood on a real stage. Now, a woman he had only recently met was the one opening that door for him. Harry looked at Camellia Ellison's business card, its edges slightly worn from being kept in his shirt pocket all week. He took a deep breath. Then he played the chaconne one more time. Saturday, 7:30 p.m. Orchestra Hall was glowing with light. The grand neoclassical structure, with its rows of white stone columns and soaring dome, was one of the most beautiful concert halls in the United States. The main auditorium could hold more than 2,000 seats, but tonight, only 1,000 were open. Just enough to create an intimate atmosphere for an experimental performance. Luxury cars lined up in front of the entrance. The audience filed in, men in tailored suits, women in evening gowns, the scent of expensive perfume blending with the aged oak of the hall. This was Chicago's cultural elite. People willing to spend $200 to $500 on a ticket just to listen to classical music. 7:45 p.m. Harry Simmons stood at the back entrance of Orchestra Hall. A slightly wrinkled white shirt, dark jeans, old boots, carefully cleaned. A faded fabric guitar case slung over his shoulder. He handed the business card to the guard, waited for confirmation, then stepped inside. Backstage at Orchestra Hall, was a completely different world. Polished wooden floors, oak-paneled walls. The faint scent of rosin used on violin bows lingered in the air. The sounds of instruments tuning echoed through the hallways. And everywhere were people in black suits, with focused, serious, confident faces, the kind of people who knew exactly that they belonged here. Harry walked down the corridor, and he could feel every pair of eyes turning toward him. Not curious, but assessing. Who is this guy? Why is he dressed like that? Did he wander in here by mistake? A musician passed by, glanced at Harry's worn fabric guitar case, then turned away with a slight smirk. Two others standing at the end of the hallway leaned toward each other, whispering, their eyes still fixed on him. Harry lowered his head and kept walking. He tried to find the room Camellia had mentioned, but the maze of corridors in Orchestra Hall was nothing like the rehearsal room from before. He turned left, turned right, then slowly realized he no longer knew where he was. He stopped in the middle of the hallway. Around him, the noise of the orchestra preparing for the performance seeped through closed doors. The sound of cellos tuning, brass testing notes, soft conversations from people inside their own world, and Harry stood there, alone, in a corridor where he knew he did not belong. The feeling came quickly. Not exactly fear, but something cold and unmistakably clear, like neon light, that he should not be here. Sure that he was just a street guitarist, wearing a wrinkled shirt, cracked boots, standing backstage in one of the most prestigious concert halls in the country. That even the fabric guitar case on his shoulder was probably cheaper than the bow ties worn by any musician here. Harry looked toward the exit. He could leave, right now. All he had to do was walk out, head back to the train station, return to his small basement room in Pilsen, and tomorrow sit again on the corner of Michigan Avenue like he had for the past 7 years. No one here truly knew who he was. No one would remember that he had come. Camellia would eventually find someone else. He turned, took 3 steps, then suddenly stopped. From somewhere behind a rehearsal room door, the sound of a cello drifted out. It was Elgar, and the very concerto his mother used to play on an old CD player every afternoon. Back when she was still healthy, when she would sit by the window, close her eyes, and quietly listen to music. Harry stood still, listening to the cello through the wall. Then he remembered his mother's voice. "You play beautifully, Harry. But who are you playing for?" He turned back, took another step forward. And this time, he didn't stop. At the end of the corridor, Camellia Ellison was waiting for him. She didn't mention that he was 5 minutes late. She simply looked at him and said, "Follow me." Camellia led Harry into a small room behind the stage. "You have 15 minutes before you go on," she said. "You'll play in the second half of the program. After the opening symphony, there will be a short intermission. Then Graham will introduce the next part. That's when you walk out, sit down, and begin." "Play the chaconne?" Harry asked. "You can play whatever you want, but I want you to start alone. Solo. Then the orchestra will come in." Harry looked at her. "Will the orchestra know how to play with me?" Camellia smiled, a subtle smile, full of implication. "I've written the orchestration specifically for tonight. The orchestra has rehearsed their part. As for you, just play the way you always do on the street. Everything will fall into place." Harry wanted to ask something more, but Camellia had already turned and walked out, and he was left alone in the small room. Harry opened his guitar case and took out the nylon string classical guitar. He gently brushed his fingers across the strings. The set was old, slightly worn, but the sound was still warm. He tuned it, played a few notes. The guitar echoed softly in the cramped space, and his heartbeat began to slow. Because this was what he knew how to do. The only thing in his life he truly knew he did well. He closed his eyes and waited. 8:30 p.m. The first half came to a close. The orchestra had just finished the opening symphony, a work by Dvorak, and the audience rewarded them with warm applause. The lights in the hall came up for a short intermission. People stood, chatted, and sipped champagne in the lobby. Backstage, Kevin Kowalski loosened his bow tie, took a sip of water, and felt that familiar sensation again. The performance had been perfectly fine, technically flawless, not a single wrong note, and completely empty, just like every other night. He had played the cello like a truck driver following a fixed route, and the Dvorak had simply completed its journey. A stagehand knocked on Harry's door. 2 minutes! Harry stood up, took a deep breath, then stepped out. The main hall of Orchestra Hall. 1,000 audience members had returned to their seats. The lights dimmed. The stage glowed under warm golden light. Conductor Graham Fletcher walked out, bowed, then turned to the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying across the hall, "the second part of Uncharted tonight is something even I only learned about recently. Camellia Ellison, whom you all know, has chosen a guest artist. I am not allowed to reveal their name or background. The only thing I can say is, please listen." Graham stepped aside. The spotlight slowly shifted toward the wings, and Harry Simmons walked out. He walked slowly, a nylon string classical guitar in his hands, a slightly wrinkled white shirt, dark jeans, old boots, no suit, no bow tie, no accessories other than the instrument. The entire hall fell silent for exactly 1 beat. Then the murmurs began. Harry felt it immediately. Hundreds of eyes scanning him from head to toe, and he knew exactly what they were thinking. Who is that? What is he wearing? Why is there a guitar on the stage of Orchestra Hall? In the front row, a music critic from the Chicago Tribune leaned toward the person beside him and whispered, "What is this?" On stage, Kevin Kowalski sat in his place among the cellists and looked up as Harry walked out. And he recognized him instantly. The man from the sidewalk, or the one he had called noise pollution. The one he had dismissed with quiet contempt. Everyone thinks they're an artist. Kevin felt a small jolt in his chest. Not anger, but something closer to shame, though he was not yet ready to name it. He turned to Felicity and gave a slight shake of his head. Felicity pressed her lips together. Duncan lowered his gaze, staring at the sheet music in front of him. Harry walked to the chair that had been placed at the center of the stage, directly in front of the orchestra. A simple wooden chair. No microphone, no amplification. Just the guitar and the natural acoustics of a hall nearly perfect for sound. He sat down, placed the guitar on his lap, adjusted his posture. And at that exact moment, from somewhere in the audience, a soft laugh was heard. Very quiet. But in the stillness of the hall, it was unmistakable. Harry heard it. He lifted his head, looking out into the audience. 1,000 faces, 1,000 doubtful eyes. Then he gently closed his eyes. The first note. Harry gently plucked the bass string. A single, low note rang out in Orchestra Hall like a bell echoing from far away. Then the second note. Then the third. He did not play the chaconne. Not Bach. Not Tárrega. He played a piece no one in the hall had ever heard before, because it was a piece he had written himself, during lonely nights in the dark basement in Pilsen. A piece with no name, no sheet music, It existed only in his mind, in his hands, and in his memory. The piece began very slowly, very softly. The notes fell apart from one another like lonely footsteps in the middle of the night. The melody was so simple that one might mistake it for an exercise for beginners. But then, the notes began to weave together. Harry played with all 10 fingers. Oh, and the sound that emerged from the instrument no longer resembled that of a single guitar. It was like a miniature orchestra unfolding within his hands. His right hand carried the bass, the harmony, and supported the melody. 3 layers of sound stacked upon one another, while his left hand moved across the fretboard with a speed and precision that could only be forged through tens of thousands of hours of practice. The entire hall fell silent. Not the polite kind of silence, but the silence of people who could not believe what they were hearing. Harry kept playing. The music began to open up, wider, denser, deeper. He played about his mother, about the nights he sat by her bedside, plucking the strings softly so she could fall asleep. He played about the years wandering the streets, the biting cold of Chicago winters, and the endless noise of traffic, the indifferent glances that passed over him as if he had never existed. He played about loneliness, about anger, about a hope he had never dared to name. All of it lived inside the music. No words, no explanation. Just listening was enough to understand. 3 minutes of solo passed. Then Harry opened his eyes and gave a slight nod. That was the signal. Graham Fletcher raised his baton. The orchestra entered. The violins spoke first, a thin, bright melodic line, following Harry's guitar like a shadow follows a person. Then the violas. Then the cellos. Then the woodwinds. Camellia Ellison had written the orchestration as if tailoring a coat perfectly fitted around the guitar, not overpowering it, not competing with it, but supporting it. The orchestra became the foundation. The guitar was the voice, and that voice, rising from a guitar with worn strings, filled Orchestra Hall with a power no one in the audience had expected. Kevin Kowalski sat among the cellos, bowing exactly as written in Camellia's score. He played every note, every rhythm correctly, but his eyes never left Harry. And for the first time, he truly listened. Not the casual listening on the sidewalk, drowned in traffic and footsteps, but listening in a hall with near-perfect acoustics, where every note was lifted by the space itself, where even the smallest vibration of a string reached the listener in full. And Kevin Kowalski, who had played the cello professionally for 30 years, who had stood on stage with the greatest artists in the world, suddenly realized that the man sitting in front of him, in a wrinkled shirt and worn boots, and was playing at a level he rarely had the chance to witness. But it was more than that. Kevin realized something else, something that tightened his chest. Harry was playing with something Kevin had lost long ago: hunger. Every note Harry touched felt like both the first and the last note of his life, as if he had waited his entire life to sit in that chair, in that light. And now he would not waste a single second. Kevin continued bowing, but his hands began to tremble. Not because he was playing wrong, but because, for the first time in many years, he truly felt the music passing through him. Harry's guitar was pulling him out of autopilot, tearing him away from that shell of technically perfect but lacking soul, forcing him to play like a real human being again. The music surged toward its climax. See, Harry entered a tremolo passage, his right-hand fingers shimmering rapidly across the treble strings, creating a continuous stream of sound that sparkled like light breaking on water. The orchestra rose with him. fortissimo, and the entire hall seemed to tremble. Then suddenly, silence. Harry stopped. The orchestra stopped. At the same instant, as if everything had just taken a single deep breath together. 1 second of stillness. Then Harry touched the final note. A single note. Low. Lingering. The sound slowly dissolved into the space of the hall. Like a candle just blown out. Silence. 3 seconds. 5 seconds. 7 seconds. 1,000 people sat motionless in the hall. No one moved. No one dared to breathe too loudly. Then, from the middle rows, one person stood up, applauded, then another, then 10, then 50. Then the entire hall rose to its feet. A standing ovation. Applause crashed through Orchestra Hall like waves against stone. Strong, relentless, unstoppable. Some people whistled. Others shouted, "Bravo!" The critic from the Chicago Tribune leapt to his feet as well, clapping while staring at the stage in stunned disbelief. So much so that he forgot he was there as a critic. Harry remained seated on the wooden chair, the guitar resting on his lap, his eyes fixed on the audience. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He just sat there, his eyes slightly red. He then gave a small nod, so subtle that almost no one noticed, as if he were saying "thank you" in a voice too quiet for anyone to hear. On stage, the orchestra began to applaud as well. Felicity Stanton, the oboist, was the first to stand. She clapped, letting her eyes fill with tears. Duncan Mercer stood up right after her. Then Keith Ashford. Then, one by one, all 60 members of the orchestra rose, turned toward Harry, and applauded him. Kevin Kowalski was the last to stand. He remained seated for a long time. The cello still rested against his shoulder. His eyes were on Harry. But what he truly saw was not only Harry. He saw himself at 20, the young man who once played Elgar with tears streaming down his face. He saw a part of himself that had died somewhere along the way, a part that, tonight, and for the first time in many years, had just stirred again. Then slowly, he stood up, set his cello down, and began to clap. Slowly, but unmistakably. In the front row, Camellia Ellison sat still. She did not stand. She did not applaud. She simply sat there, her hands resting quietly on her lap, looking at Harry on stage with the eyes of someone who had just confirmed that her ears had never betrayed her. Not even once. Then she smiled. Backstage, after the performance, Harry was putting his guitar back into its case when he heard footsteps outside the door. He looked up. Kevin Kowalski was standing there. The hallway was quiet. No audience, no cameras, no one watching or witnessing. Kevin didn't fully step inside. He just stood at the doorway, one hand resting on the frame as if he needed it to keep himself upright. The cello was no longer with him. He had left it in the rehearsal room. Without the instrument in his hands, Kevin seemed smaller, as if a part of the person Harry had seen on stage was now missing. Silence stretched between them. Kevin opened his mouth, then closed it, opened it again. "That night on the sidewalk," he began, then stopped midway. He swallowed, as if forcing the words out of his throat. "That night on the sidewalk, you were playing Recuerdos de la Alhambra." Harry looked at him. "You recognized the piece?" "I recognized it from the second note." Another silence. Kevin looked down at his polished leather shoes. Then his gaze drifted to Harry's cracked boots. After that, he turned his face away. He started, but his voice faltered, as if the words he was trying to say were breaking apart before they could form. He stopped, took a deep breath, and when he spoke again, His voice was no longer that of Kevin Kowalski, the leading cellist who always knew what to say, how to stand, how to present himself, but the voice of a man trying to say something he had never learned how to say in his entire life. "I heard you play that night, right there on the sidewalk, and I knew you were good. I knew it from that moment, but I chose not to admit it, because," he hesitated, "because if I admitted that someone sitting on a sidewalk could play at that level, then what did my 30 years amount to?" Harry said nothing. He simply looked at Kevin. Kevin lifted his head. His eyes were red now, and this time he didn't try to hide it. "For 3 years, I've been playing the cello without feeling anything. Like a machine." He spoke slowly, each sentence pulled out with effort. "And tonight, you sat there, with a guitar that probably costs less than the bow tie I wear, and you played with something I lost a long time ago. I don't even know what to call it. But I know I don't have it anymore." He paused, took a breath, his breathing visibly unsteady. "I'm not good at apologizing. Honestly, I've never had to apologize like this." He looked down at the floor. "But tonight, I owe you an apology. Not just for what I said on the sidewalk, but also because I looked at you and decided you weren't worth listening to. I didn't even stop to ask whether I myself was still someone worth listening to." The last sentence landed heavily, as if Kevin had been carrying it all night, only to realize, once spoken, that it weighed even more than he thought. Harry looked at him for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice calm, not angry, not pitying, simply honest. "You're not the only one." Kevin was silent. "For 7 years," Harry continued, "every day, thousands of people walk past where I sit, look at me once, and decide exactly that." Kevin closed his eyes, gave a small nod. Then he extended his hand. Not the kind of handshake of the classical music world, not a polite, formal, or well-rehearsed gesture, but an awkward offering of a hand from someone who had reached the end of everything he knew how to do, and didn't know what else to do. Harry looked at that hand, the hand of a cellist, long fingers, calloused from strings, not so different from his own. Then he reached out and shook it. Kevin gave a light squeeze, then let go, turned, and walked quickly down the hallway. He didn't look back. His footsteps echoed on the wooden floor, growing fainter, smaller, until they disappeared at the end of the corridor. Harry stood there, watching until Kevin was gone. Then he looked down and continued putting his guitar back into its case. 2 weeks after the night of Uncharted, the review in the Chicago Tribune ran with a bold headline: "Orchestra Hall has just witnessed something inexplicable." The critic wrote 400 words, ending with a sentence that people would repeat for days afterward. "I don't know who Harry Simmons is, but I know that on Saturday night, for 12 minutes, he played better than anyone I have heard in this hall over the past 20 years. The article spread quickly. Social media exploded when someone in the audience posted a secretly recorded phone clip, blurry images, distorted audio, poor quality to the point of being almost unwatchable. But it was still enough for people to hear that guitar. And that was enough for them to understand why 1,000 people had risen to their feet. Camellia Ellison received dozens of calls. From record labels, from event organizers, from conservatories wanting to invite Harry to perform, or even to teach. She forwarded them all to Harry. Harry listened, thanked them, then gently said he needed time to think. 1 month later, Harry Simmons was still sitting at his usual corner on Michigan Avenue every evening. The same old folding chair, the same open guitar case beside him. But a few things had changed. His worn acoustic guitar now had a new set of strings. The guitar case held more money than before, not because the entire city had suddenly recognized him, but because a few people had started to stop. Truly stop, stand still, and listen. Harry accepted a few performance invitations, not all of them, only the ones that felt right to him. He also began teaching guitar formally at a community center in Pilsen, for children like he once was. Children who could not afford to step into a conservatory, but who had ears that could hear and hands that longed to touch music. As for Kevin Kowalski, just 2 weeks after Uncharted, he took a leave of absence. No one in the Chicago Symphony Orchestra really knew why. Some said he went on vacation. Some guessed he had health issues. But the truth was much simpler. Kevin just needed time to be alone with his cello, in an empty room, with no audience, no sheet music, no stage lights, to ask himself a question he had avoided for years: whether he still loved music. And if the answer was no, whether he could learn to love it again from the beginning. Camellia Ellison continued to visit Harry once a month. She brought coffee, sat on the folding chair beside him, and quietly listened as he played. She didn't say much. She just listened. One time, Harry asked her, "Why did you come back 3 times? Most people pass by once and forget me." Camellia took a sip of coffee. She looked at the stream of people moving along Michigan Avenue. Thousands of figures passing one another, hurried, distant, almost no one looking down. "The first time, I listened with my ears," she said. "The second time, I listened with my mind. And the third time, I listened with the part inside that people can't explain." She paused. "Harry, I'm old. And when people grow old, they understand that the most valuable things in life rarely exist in concert halls or on stages, and they're usually found in places no one bothers to look." She turned to him. "And my ears, after 60 years of listening to music, still know how to resonate when they encounter something real." Harry smiled. For the first time in many years, that smile looked exactly like the smile of the 19-year-old student who had once been accepted into the Oberlin Conservatory, before life suddenly turned away from him. He picked up his guitar and began to play. On Michigan Avenue, pedestrians continued to pass by like every other evening. Most of them still didn't stop. But tonight, 3 people did. Then 5. Then 10. And Harry Simmons played for them, for the people who chose to stop, with the same heart he had carried onto the stage of Orchestra Hall. Because to Harry, anyone who truly listens deserves the very best he has to give, whether they are seated in rows of red velvet chairs, or simply standing still on a sidewalk. Perhaps the saddest thing in life is not the absence of talent, but the existence of people who carry within them something beautiful, something real, something rare, and yet are passed by the entire world as if they never existed. Harry Simmons did not change overnight. What changed was simply that, at last, someone was quiet enough to hear him. And sometimes, the miracle is not that an unknown person gets to step onto a grand stage. The miracle is that, in a world that is always quick to judge by appearances, there is still someone willing to pause long enough to recognize the true value right in front of them. If this story resonates with you, subscribe to the channel to follow more stories like this. Stories about dignity, about overlooked talent, and about the small moments that can change an entire life. And perhaps, the next time you pass by someone who seems ordinary, you might stop just a little longer, because sometimes the most extraordinary thing is sitting quietly on a street corner no one bothers to look at.